Hello, welcome back to Our Bookshop in Tring. I'm Ben Morehouse. So we've got another author interview today, and we're talking to the wonderful Louise Candlish. Many of you remember she came in November and spoke about her book, Our House. She's now produced another book, and it's a psychological thriller called The Other Passenger, and it's only just out. We're lucky enough to have her talking to Jules Wake.
Thank you, Ben. Well, hello, Louise, and it's lovely to see you again, although albeit in very different circumstances to last time. How are you doing in lockdown?
I'm absolutely fine. I mean, I'm fortunate enough that none of my close friends or family have been ill, and so we've just been trying to make a virtue of it and be patient about returning to our old lifestyles. But I'm absolutely fine. How about you?
Well, I mean, nothing changes for me. I thought I've been at home for the last 18 months writing full time, so I tend to squirrel myself away like a little bag lady anyway, so not emerging very often is quite normal for me these days.
No, well, it wasn't much of a transition, was it, for writers? I remember in the first sort of few weeks, writers were very kind of, what's the problem? This is life as we know it anyway, and everyone else had to adjust. Not just writers, obviously, other home workers as well. But after a while, you do start to prize that kind of solitary time at home, don't you? Because I've got my family, and we're all here all the time, and that's the difference. It's actually being less solitary than before.
I would agree with that. But I want to talk about your new book, which you're going to hate me for this. I started reading it on Saturday because I only just got my copy then, and I'd finished it by Sunday morning. I absolutely raced through it. It's a real gripping read. And you probably hate me for that because it probably took you months and months and months to
No,
write.
well,
But
as you know, that's the greatest compliment, isn't it? When when someone stays up all night. Or I always say that I really can recommend a book when the room has gone dark around me as I'm reading and I haven't even noticed. So it sounds like you had that experience.
Oh, I did. And all the way through, I'm thinking, how did she think of that? And where did that come from? What I love about your writing is that every book I read is so original and fresh. You don't repeat yourself. You come up with this plot, I think, is one of the most original I've read for a long time. It's absolutely brilliant.
Thank
So
you.
I would love to know where you got the seeds of the idea, but I suppose I ought to, for the sake of anybody who hasn't read it yet, just let you tell the viewers a little bit about what it's about. It's called The Other Passenger, which I
Yeah,
think is a fantastic title, and I'll
that's
come on to
the
that.
finished cover. Yeah. You've got a proof, haven't you, Jules?
Yes,
Yes,
sorry, I have.
it's The Other Passenger, and it's like my previous few books. It's a thriller, a sort of domestic noir, I suppose you could call it. But it's set on the Thames, and it has a very almost a kind of cinematic sort of film noir feel to it, and that's what I was inspired by. But it's a commuter story, so it's two commuters, two guys. Jamie, who's our narrator, he narrates the whole story. He's sort of pushing 50, and he starts commuting on the river bus on the Thames with his younger neighbour who's called Kit, and he's about 30. And they and their partners double date and become quite close. And so when the book begins, Jamie is taking their usual commute, but Kit hasn't turned up for the boat that day. So we have this opening scene where you sort of follow the journey around the Thames from the sort of Woolwich area into the lovely iconic London area of Tower Bridge and the Tower of London and the Shard and the London Eye. And he gets off at his stop, which happens to be at the London Eye, and he's met by two policemen, and they want to question him about the disappearance of Kit. Kit's wife, Amelia, has reported him missing. Not only that, but Jamie is thought to be the last person to have seen him alive. So that's how the story opens. And then you go back in time and you see how their relationship developed, and that's when a very double-crossing sort of plot starts to unravel.
Yes, so I've phrased my questions very carefully because I don't want to spoil the plot, because it is quite complicated. And So this was a later question, but I'm going to start straight away because there's a lot of deception starts to be revealed towards the end of the book. And I wanted to know, because I had to keep going back and thinking, well, did he know that? Or did she know that? In fact, I actually read the end of the book twice, and you did it brilliantly. There were no plot holes at all. So
I'm so pleased to hear that. Someone will find one.
So I thought, well, he didn't know that. Well, how did he know that? And what did he know? How on earth did you keep track of who knew what? Because towards the end, it was quite crucial that certain people didn't know what the other one did. And I thought that was so clever, but also so complicated. How on earth did you manage?
Well, you have instantly, I mean, it just shows that you're an author too, because you've instantly picked up on the hardest thing. It was quite hard to keep track of who knew what, because when you've got a deception plot, it's not only what people actually know, but it's what they're letting other people think they know. So there's multiple layers of who knows what and who knows they know what, if you see what I mean. So every so often I would realize I'd made an error. And I would then sort of step back and I'd kind of do a little kind of little written list of the characters and what they knew and what they thought the other characters knew. Luckily, there were only 4 characters, so I mean, it could have got enormously complicated if there were, 12 characters, say. So I would say, I'd literally write down Jamie, what he knows in this scene, what he thinks Melia knows, what he thinks Claire knows, what he thinks Kit knows. And then I would do that for all the characters. And so it was very, almost mathematical, just to keep track of it. Most of the time, because I really enjoyed writing this book, probably more than any of my novels. So it all came very fluently. And so a lot of it was just naturally in my head, because I was just sort of so close to it. And I was, really getting into the zone. But if I did feel that I was losing a grip of the deception and the double crossing and who knew what when, that's what I did. And I found the same actually with Our House, which was also a very complicated book that some of your customers may have read. I had to do multiple timelines and similar sorts of just taking stock, little notes for myself in the background. And that's what makes a book seem effortless, I think, when there has been huge amounts of effort behind the scenes.
Well, it was brilliant, because as I say, I did go back because I thought, oh, did he know that? But you covered everything.
Thank you. I'm so pleased.
So you said you enjoyed writing this book more than the previous ones. So one thing that really fascinated me was, because obviously those people was multi-viewpoint with lots and lots of different characters telling the story from their point of view, whereas this one was very different because it was all from Jamie's point of view. So I was going to ask, was that a deliberate choice, or did the plot demand it? And did you find it easier or harder to write from just one person's perspective? Because as a writer, sometimes I find that if you can jump to someone else's perspective, it just makes life a bit easier sometimes.
It does, yes, no, that's absolutely right. And also it makes it, gives that freshness in the, the experience of writing. If you're getting, slightly jaded by one person's viewpoint, you can switch to another, and it makes it more exciting for the writer. But I find it easier to keep control of things if there's only one narrator. And certainly for a deception or a fraud kind of plot, it is it's a good thing to do, because your narrator can be, may not know stuff that other characters know, and that's absolutely fine, because I don't want to trick the reader. I want it all to be above board, if you see what I mean. I'm not going to withhold anything as the author, but the characters might want to withhold something for reasons of their own. And so in many ways it was easier just to have one narrator. But I was surprised by how quickly I got inside the head of Jamie, and maybe it was because I started with that. The very first scene I wrote was that opening scene on the river, and I just re-established the mood very quickly. And so I knew his voice. He's got a very kind of jaded, cynical Gen X, quite complacent kind of voice, but also he's not a bad guy. He's live and let live. He's not a kind, he hasn't got that sort of judgmental, righteous sort of tone that some younger people sometimes have. He's very kind of, you want to do your way, that's cool with me. But as long as no one messes with my lifestyle, my creature comforts. So yes, I just established the mood and the voice very, very quickly, and it's not beyond the realms of possibility, is it, to start a book imagining that you'll have one narrator and then decide to introduce another. And in fact, that's what I've done with the book I'm writing right now for my release for next year. But with this one, Jamie, it just worked so well. The narrative style and the subject matter just married very well, I thought. And so I didn't need anyone else. But there is, in fact, a tiny little scene at the end in someone else's voice, a main character. Finally, we get a glimpse inside the workings of their mind, but we won't say who it is. But that was actually suggested by my publisher, my editors, and the team at Simon & Schuster, and I just thought it was a stroke of genius, and it's definitely theirs, not mine. I gave that person a voice, but it wasn't my idea, and I think it's just a lovely little way to end the book.
I have to say, one of my questions was, I love the epilogue.
Yeah.
Is it important to you that your characters get their comeuppance?
Yeah, I think it must be important to me. I mean, I don't kind of consciously think, right, they need their comeuppance. It just sort of always happens. So I'm obviously looking to punish people. I mean, I'm very interested in, the idea, and, just what I've come to experience as a, middle-aged person, that none of us is purely good and none of us is purely bad. And everyone's flawed and everyone makes mistakes. And so I tend to punish everyone or no one. So I'm not only going to punish the criminals. Sometimes I might punish the victim, because my experience of life is that, it's Russian roulette in terms of who gets their comeuppance, and especially when it's this is a crime book that's amateur criminals, and so you can't be counting on a detective character to be your moral compass. You're not counting on even the justice system necessarily working. It's all being done in this sort of outlaw sort of way. As those people was as well, with that kind of vigilante neighbourhood feel. And so, hopefully it's not predictable who will get their comeuppance. But given that normally someone does, it must be important to me. I must be a moral person deep down.
I think readers also expect it, don't they? They want everybody to be in the right place at the end. But I did.
Yeah, and that's very much the kind of the attraction of procedural crime fiction. You need to be able to count on the detective reaching a solution and dispensing justice. But a thriller, suspense thriller, is slightly different, because it's usually characters who've, ordinary people like us who've lost control of, the norms, and they're not necessarily being helped by a lawyer or a detective. And in this case, Jamie is being questioned about something. He's suspected of possibly being involved in murder, and he hasn't. He is the innocent victim.
Yes, I like the way that. Yeah, no, that's great. I like the way that you played on our sympathies, because, as you said, your characters are very flawed and they're very sharply observed. I mean, in this book, there's sort of the characters are almost defined by what they have and what they don't have in terms of money and property, and how that affects millennials and Generation X. But they're very flawed, and your characters aren't necessarily very sympathetic.
No, no, absolutely. I'm not afraid to write dislikable characters. I mean, I always like them because I've created them and I find them fascinating, but there's not going to be someone who is obviously the one to sympathize with, or I might lead you into a false sense of sympathy and then it's pulled away when you realize what they're really up to. But interesting that you mentioned the generation, you know, the haves and have-nots in terms of the generations, because that was one of the themes that I really wanted to explore with this book. It's probably the main theme, actually. You know, the kind of totally justifiable envy that can spring up simply on the basis of your age. At my age, I'm 51. To me, it's so obvious that nothing is as wonderful and precious as being young. But I absolutely can see how irritating it must be to be 25 and to have your parents telling you how they bought their first flat in central London for 60 grand or whatever. And you know that you never in a million years will you be able to enjoy the same sorts of, you know, make the same sorts of acquisitions as they did. And Amelia and Kit are totally motivated by a sense of entitlement that they should be leading the lifestyle that they feel you know, is right for them. They're not really interested in working incredibly hard. And I think there is a sense that there is no, you can't do it by working incredibly hard anymore as you used to be able to, particularly in London. So the generational conflict was really fascinating to me, but equally I didn't want to have kind of cliched millennial characters who want to, you know, run a craft brewery. So Kit is the younger man, but he's the one working in the kind of white collar job. And Jamie, who's Gen X, the one who you'd expect to be in the white collar job. Here comes my dog, by the way, so I apologise if he springs up into screen, and I'll try and get rid of him. But yeah, so Jamie's the one who's working as a barista in a, can you see him? Sorry about this. This is the bonus that you get. This is Bertie. Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. What you own and the status that you feel that gives you is at the heart of the novel.
So I remember talking to you about, I think it was Our House and the seed of the idea that you got there. So did you have a seed of an idea for this book? Because I mean, it's a very complicated plot, and I don't want to reveal what drives it all, but was that an idea that came to you, or had you read something?
It was more, well, as actually similarly to Our House, I'd sort of collected various things that I was fascinated by, one being the generational conflict. I had wanted to write a commuter thriller for a while, and I'd been kind of just mulling over how that could be done without really just replicating the territory of The Girl on the Train, which was done so well. And, you know, you said earlier that my plots are quite original, and it's because that's the most important thing to me, because there are so many classic and wonderful thrillers being published all the time. I really just want to do things sort of slightly outside the norm. But yes, I was on a boat. I was on one of the Thames Clippers traveling to the O2. And it just suddenly occurred to me, oh my God, this would be absolutely amazing. And I'd wanted to bring the action into central London, so it all came together. But I think probably the biggest inspiration was Double Indemnity, the old noir movie co-written by Raymond Chandler and starring Barbara Stanwyck. And for those who've seen that movie, that will give them more of a sense of what this plot is about. But I really wanted to do a modern noir and to have a modern femme fatale in Melia, who can, you know, sort of manipulate men, particularly older men, without them suspecting that.
So you keep answering all the questions I wanted to ask. So one of them was, how many times did you do that trip up and down the river, and the fact that you chose something, a commuter line that's completely unusual and outside most people's reality. I mean, I have done the trip up and down on the boat a couple of times from the O2, It's the best escape route from a concert ever.
Yes, it totally is. Yeah, it totally is. And I've done it so many times when I've been queuing to get in the tube at the O2. And, you know, you might stand there for an hour before you can get down to a platform, but you can just wander onto the boat because it's surprisingly a little known. And people think in London, there's this idea that it's a really expensive way to commute, but it's actually, you know, a fraction more than the tube.
And so much more pleasant.
It's much more pleasant. It's quite slow, but again, once you do that whole door-to-door reckoning of the tube and the overland train and the, you know, the bus you might have to catch to your local stop, it's not that much slower. And I think I'm hoping it will inspire people to look into that as an option when they do go back to commuting. But you do need to be fairly close to the river. Otherwise, you know, it really is difficult to manage. So my characters live in a fictitious suburb called St Mary's, which is very close to Woolwich. In reality, for those who don't know the Thames Clipper route, it begins at Woolwich and then it takes you past the Greenwich Peninsula where the O2 is, and then you get to Greenwich proper. And
there's a lovely description there, absolutely beautiful, of Greenwich Park.
Oh, thank you.
It just really stood out for me. I won't spoil it, but it's just, that's a piece of beautiful writing. It really is.
Oh, you're very kind. I really wanted to use Greenwich, although they don't live in Greenwich. There is a scene takes place in the Greenwich Foot Tunnel, which again, for those who don't know, is such an atmospheric place. It's actually quite creepy because it's a very narrow tunnel, and the Thames is actually quite wide. When you're going under it, you know, it takes several minutes to get through that foot tunnel. So there's a scene that takes place there. So I wanted to include a few of the places that I find quite fascinating. And there's a cable car scene as well, which we won't say what happens on the cable car. But our main character, Jamie, suffers from claustrophobia. And so this is why he takes the boat, because he can no longer go on the tube. He was involved in a terrible incident, which you read about in the book. And the overland trains are also very cramped, and so for him it's a way of him being able to share in, you know, working life without having to have this terror every morning and every evening. But Kit just wants to do it because it's a laugh, and you know, you can have a nice beer on the way home. But it's hugely civilized compared to the tube. This is a very civilized way to get to work, let me tell you.
Well, and also you get to see some amazing properties from the river, which probably wouldn't have helped Kit that much.
No, absolutely. He's tormented in all directions by all the things he thinks he should have that he doesn't have. And the other theme, I mean, there are so many themes in the book, as you know, but I really wanted to sort of touch on debt and this kind of, you know, appalling kind of albatross that young people, you know, enter the workplace with, this, you know, huge debts. And it just makes it so difficult. And again, this is something that, you know, Jamie and Claire didn't experience. They went to university for free, and, you know, they left university without a debt. And so you can absolutely see how, as a society, we've set up antagonism between the generations. And it's such a shame. And, you know, I really wish we hadn't reached this point. But I absolutely understand how infuriating it must be to be told that, you know, this generation before yours was able to just walk away from university with a, you know, with a zero bank balance, no debt at all.
Seems impossible to believe now, doesn't it?
No.
So I'm going to ask, time has whizzed by, so I'm going to ask one last question. The title, in fact, I've got a couple of last questions. The title is a very clever reference to one of the deceptions in the book. Was that always the title, or did it come after the book was written?
No, it was always the title. And I normally I can remember when I thought of the title. I mean, quite often it's not my title that's used on the end product. I can't remember. It might have come up when I was writing those first couple of scenes, and one of the detectives says, another passenger says they saw you. And starts referencing this other passenger. Yeah. So it may have come up right at the beginning, but no, that was the working title, and that was the title that everyone has, you know, been happy to accept, which is not always the case, as I'm sure you know.
I do know, but it's a very clever title because it's actually a deception on everybody, which I really, really liked.
Yes, absolutely. Just let's see how many readers can guess who the other passenger is, because that's one of the mysteries. Who is this other passenger?
So the other thing I wanted to know was, because I am not a planner, I'm a terrible dive in by the seat of my pants and see where I go, which obviously you can't do if you're writing a thriller as twisty and turny as this. So what I wanted to know is, do you plan the whole thing before you start? Do you know all the twists, or do they come as you're writing, or do some of them come as you're editing? So I suppose I'm asking what your process is when you're starting.
Yeah, you definitely can't do it by the seat of your pants with crime and thrillers, because you would just waste too much time. You'd have to, you know, discard a lot of material if you did it that way, and I've just learned to be efficient. I always plan loosely, and then I will know what the main twist is. But what helps me is to write a full synopsis, you know, almost old style, and US publishers usually ask for that, and so I've often got to do it anyway. And that helps me kind of hone the outline. And then I will have a sort of live list of scenes which will move around and which I'll add to. Little revelations, a big twist I'll always know about in advance, although I won't always know if it's going to work. But smaller revelations, I might just have the idea as I'm writing. But sometimes I find that having a great idea in the middle of the night and then trying to implement it causes, you know, the ripple effect of so many things that you have to go back and retrofit and modify, that it's almost not worth it unless it's a really good revelation. So I'd say it's kind of loosely planned, but I always allow myself to, you know, to introduce a brainwave if one strikes.
And did one strike?
No, I think it was fairly preordained with this one. Yeah, absolutely. Certainly the big twist. And you know, the fact that it is a double crossing plot meant that I needed to sort of know who was double crossing whom, and how many times removed right from the beginning. But probably some little things, maybe some little loose ends tied up. You know, there's one scene at the end that I certainly didn't plan, but I really like, but I'm not going to say where it's set because that will slightly give the game away. And then as we spoke about the epilogue, yeah. That was definitely unplanned. And that actually is quite a twist. That was unplanned.
Yeah, and it makes it very satisfying.
I think it does, but but for readers who, once you've finished it, it will give you an idea of how mean I am that I planned that book without the epilogue. Because the epilogue is, you're right, it's satisfying for people who would like to see justice. And that was, as I say, suggested by my editors. And so I'm obviously much meaner because I wouldn't have included that naturally.
So what next? What are you working on now?
I'm working on another suspense, you know, another noir, another thriller. It's got a sort of semi-river location. It's set in Shad Thames, and it's called The Heights, and it has a sort of almost a vertigo feel about it, this one. There are some similarities with The Other Passenger, but it's more of a family revenge drama, actually. So yeah, hopefully people will enjoy it, but it's not finished yet. That's what I'll be doing after we finish this interview. I'll be going back to it and seeing just how much work is needed before I deliver it. That will be out next summer, I think.
Brilliant. Well, it's lovely talking to you, and thank you very much for sparing the time. And I hope that the book, which is The Other Passenger, is a huge hit. How long has it been out?
It came out on the 25th of June, so a week, I guess. Yeah, 10 days or something. Yeah, and the audiobook is out this week. But yes, the hardback is out now.
Okay. Well, I wish you lots of success. I hope it goes really well. And I have to say, I thoroughly recommend it. It's a fabulous story. And I think it's probably your best yet.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Massive thanks to Louise and to Jules for that wonderful interview. So we've got The Other Passenger in stock. Give us a call on 01442 827 653. We've also got her previous book, Our House, in stock as well. All other purchase blurb is available underneath the video. So many more interviews lined up, so do watch out, subscribe to YouTube and watch it. You can also see it on Instagram TV as well. Thanks ever so much and see you next time.